Please stand. My brothers and sisters, our good news this morning has been recorded for us by Matthew. On that day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down by the sea. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood along the shore. He spoke to them at length in parables, saying, "A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path. Birds came and they ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns. The thorns grew up, and they choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil, produced incredible fruit, 100, 60, or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear." "Hear the parable of the sower," he continued. "The seed sowed on the path is the one who hears the word of the kingdom without understanding it. Evil one comes and steals away what was sown in the heart. The seed sown on rocky ground is the one who hears the word, receives it at once with joy, but has no root, and therefore it only lasts a short period of time. When some tribulation or persecution comes because of the word, he immediately falls away. The seed sowed among thorns is the one who hears the word, but the worldly anxieties and concerns and the lure of riches choke the word, and it bears no fruit. But the seed sown on rich soil is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears yield and fruit 100, 60, or 30-fold. The gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for missing me the last 2 weeks and for letting me know that I was missed and sought after and wanted to know exactly what my itinerary was all last Sunday because I had to check in because I wasn't here. So I have that being printed out, and everyone will get a copy of what I did last Sunday. So you'll know that I was with you all in spirit, for sure. I think there's a number of different perspectives to this, but let me start with an experience we had literally last Sunday coming back. So we went up to Rhode Island with the boat, and on the way back from Rhode Island, as it was when we were going, we hit an enormous patch of fog. It was really very dense. And it was so to the point that you really couldn't see much beyond the bow of the boat. Now, luckily, the boat has all the equipment and technology to get us through difficult times like that. You can read the radar, and I must admit that when we got to Rhode Island, I was watching YouTube videos. You could learn everything on YouTube, including how to read radars. And so I was getting more accustomed to it. And luckily enough, on the way back, we had to do that. Now, there were 3 of us on the boat, and I think there's no judgment to who was better than who in all this, but there were 3 very different reactions. One was, a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, which is absolutely understandable because you can't see where you're going, you don't see anything in front of you, and you're trusting that someone else who is trying to drive the boat is driving in such a way that we're not going to run into anything. And I got to tell you, as that other guy, as the other one, right, here I am using technology, trying to figure out a way to get through what the situation was, right? It was one of the possible answers to what the situation was. You either just sat in concern and fear, which absolutely legitimate to 100%, or you're trying to work your way through it. And then the third response was really just one where you'd sort of sit back and sort of see what happens, which is where Arthur was through the whole thing. He was really very calm and relaxed, and through the whole thing was helping look, not that it mattered because you couldn't see, from here to 2 pews back. It wouldn't make any difference. But I thought it was interesting because as you go through life and as we hit fog in our life, as we lose sight, we have the same three reactions, don't we? We have the absolute same three reactions in life, where we become terrified and anxious and stressed out, and it literally sort of shuts us down, and rightfully so, because it is challenging and difficult, right? And then there's the other person who's trying to work their way through the situation, who sort of, I don't know, whatever you call them, A personality types or whatever that might be, where you're actually engaged and you're trying to sort of work your way through and make sure that you reach to the other side. You're actually engaged in a very real process. Or, you're the person who sits back and just sort of waits and see what would happen. All three of them are very legitimate. Not one is better than another. But as you move through life, and as we hit patches of fog, those reactions, come up time and time again. We can think about the member of our church community, Ruth and Corey, right? They lost their 21-year-old daughter, and then Ruth just lost her dad. And so you can imagine the fog that they're in at the moment, and how they probably are moving from one state to another of the three examples I just laid out. And that's the other possibility for all of us. We're all probably never stuck in one place. We're moving from one thing to another. And all of that just, I think, speaks to what the human condition is as we're going through life. This parable, there's two specific things about it, but one, let's talk about how Jesus uses it first. Jesus talks about the word, as the seed. Now, this is Matthew's gospel, and Matthew would have that, but recognize by the time you get to the fourth gospel, John's gospel, in John's gospel, who is the word? Jesus. Right? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and then there is this translation that happens where Jesus is that Word, right? So Matthew is seeing it as the Word spoken by Jesus and how well it is being received. And it goes through rocky, right? And then it goes into thorns, and then it goes into rich soil, and then there are different responses to the word depending on where it falls. And so I know that typically once we hear this gospel, we're all sitting there going, well, what kind of soil am I? Am I the rocky one? Am I the thorny one? Am I the rich soil? And if we're honest with ourselves, we have to say that we're never one all the time. If we're honest with ourselves, we move through this process of being rocky, thorny, or rich in the course of our lives. It happens all the time. It's not as though, and I think this is the point here, is that Jesus is trying to, exemplify how we respond to the word, whether we're talking about the word or whether we're talking about Jesus as the word in our life, as a person we're in relationship with, that, there are times when we are a little bit more rocky and persecutions come up, something happens, right? Something we read, something we see, and all of a sudden we forget who we are. We forget who we are in relationship with Jesus or what his word promises. It happens to all of us. The interesting thing is that, notice, if you will, how Jesus describes the worries and concerns and stresses of life and riches. He puts all that together and he calls them thorns. And I find that very interesting that he would use thorn bushes as the example for those things. Now look, those of you who have been to our house and been in our backyard, you know that we have rose bushes. And they go around most of the back of the property, and they're really very pretty, except for when you go to try to get something out of them, like a piece of paper or something that's blown in. Now all of a sudden you got to take this perfectly good natural hand that has no protection against thorns. You're sticking it in, and when you go to grab a piece of paper or whatever you might be trying to pull out, a branch or whatever that has fallen into it, when you're pulling out, you're typically getting cut, and it is very likely that those thorns continue to stick to you. that there's a process by which when you're pulling your hand out, at the end, you got to sit there and pull out a couple thorns. Isn't it interesting that out of everything, anxiety, stress, and worry is what Jesus affiliates with something that even if you come out of the rose bush, even if you come out of the thorniness, you still have thorns attached to you. And for all of us who live, regular, ordinary lives, we have to admit there's some truth to that. That, once we experience stress, anxiety, and worry, it sort of sticks with us for a while. It's harder to get away and harder to break free and just to get totally clear of. It's usually a process that we have to go through. We actually have to work through it in our head and in our hearts. We have to control our feelings. We have to analyze our feelings. We have to think about why we're feeling this way. And when it comes to riches, Jesus is talking about attachments. What are the things that we're attached to? He's not talking about just material wealth. These things could be the title of our job, the work that we have, the work we don't have. It could be any number of things, the nicest car on the block. The clothes we wear. Whatever the attachments are, Jesus is pointing to them as being thorns, that it's harder for us to break away from those things, and those things take work. And this week I just found that enormously insightful, because in my own life, in my own experience, I would say that's very true. It's not like just stopping walking on sandy shores or up a rocky hill where you just stop and say, well, I'm done, and then you're sort of relieved from that. If you're trying to break away from being worried, stressful, concerned, or any of your attachments, there's generally a process that you need to go through. And I think the fact that Jesus considers them thorns is specifically to indicate that they are more difficult and challenging, and also there is a process required to break away from those. To get them totally out of our life requires more work. And that usually, even if we step out of the situation that made us stressful, anxious, worried, we're typically still carrying some of the wounds of the experience. I just found this week that to be very, very insightful, and I'm not even sure that Jesus meant it that way, but perhaps it's just how I see it in my own experience. And then, of course, there's the rich soil where there is this harvest. It has always been proclaimed in such a way and taught in such a way and preached about in such a way that we're trying to figure out which type of soil we are, but yet at the same time, like I just shared, I don't think that's the point. I think the bigger issue is that we are those things all the time. And sometimes in the course of one day, we could go through all three, because we're human beings and there is that process, right? So, if that is the case, and I think that is what Jesus is pointing to, Jesus understands human condition. Look, as Son of God, he is also, quote, Son of Man. He is fully human and fully divine, and he is hanging around a bunch of guys who he has called his apostles and disciples, who, quite frankly, in most of the Gospels, don't get a really good play. They're not really good marketing material at all. They are weak. They stumble. They don't understand. They're confused, right? You could imagine 3 years of that, right? Come on. At some point, he's got to be sitting there and saying, what else do I have to tell you, right? So here's a parable, which for his audience, for the people he was talking to, probably would have understood this. But who is Jesus surrounded with? Fishermen. They don't do any of the seed stuff. So it's almost like he's got to sit down, and the explanation is to sort of go, okay, look, I know you have no idea what I just said. So this is the way this is going to play out, right? So he sits down and explains all this. What I want us to focus on for a moment, and I really like us to settle on, and if you leave today with anything, one message clearly, I want us to look at the sower. I want us to focus on the sower. Now, everyone in that audience listening to Jesus who owned a field, and most of them did, right? All of those people, agriculture and fishing, two major sources of revenue and income in that entire region, okay? So his audience is a really good mix of both. And just because you're a fisherman doesn't mean that you didn't have a field where you were growing something, one, to feed your own family, or two, to sell to make money off of, right? So his entire audience understands what this is. They also understand what is the cost of seed. Seed is very expensive. Seed is just very expensive. You would have to take a percentage of the profit of your crop, and you would have to sell that to get the money to get the seed. So seed and getting seed to produce is precious. It's absolutely precious. This sower has absolutely no concept. This sower has no concept of what it means to have precious seed. Because no good sower, no one with even the smallest amount of experience would possibly be throwing seed into stony, rocky spaces or into thorns. The sower would absolutely know not to do that, because by doing that, there is no return for that seed. You've just, in some people's minds, you have just wasted it, because it's not going to produce anything because of where it is. So who is the sower? It's God the Father. The sower is God. The sower is the seed. And this sower is so incredibly generous and unconcerned about even the fact if the seed only produces this much infantile amount, it is worth sowing because of what it is able to do. If God is the sower, then we have this amazingly generous personification and character of God the Father that everyone sitting in the audience would have been saying to themselves, well, what's he doing? No one does that. Why would you waste a seed like that? And the fact is that he continues to do it. He knows clearly that this is a rocky area. He knows that. And he still throws seed there. He knows this is a thorny area. Thorny area, basically visible, right? Thorny, rocky, visible, right? Most sowers don't put anything there. But God the Father is so incredibly generous with the grace of his word, whether it be the word spoken or Jesus, who is the word become flesh, right? He is so generous in that capacity that everything is coated with this seed, and this is an ongoing process by the Father. The Father just doesn't care. The Father doesn't see the limitations. He doesn't understand, nor will he respect the fact that some people shouldn't get any seed because they're not ready yet to produce 30, 60, or 100-fold. That's the irony. He doesn't care what the production is. Yes, of course, if you produce 30, 60, or 100%, awesome. That's great. But he's also fine. Realize he's fine with the people who are simply going to receive the word and produce such a small amount. He's okay with that. He continues seeding those areas over and over and over again. It is enough for him. And yet we've always looked at this parable and we said to ourselves, well, geez, I'm probably somewhere between rocky and thorny. Probably most of my life, somewhere in there, right? And so I'm never going to be this. But understand, you're still seated. You're still seated, no matter how you see yourself. And I love this. For as long as I've been proclaiming the gospel, when you talk about this, you could see it in people's eyes, that they're starting to assess themselves. Which one am I? Which one am I? Where do I fit? But what we don't understand is that to Jesus, the bigger point was, God the Father's not saving the seed just for the rich soil. He's sharing it with everybody, everything, all around. and is willing, whatever the response is. And again, I go back to the point that I think Jesus fully understands human nature and says that at any given point in our day, we are one of those three things. We're either rocky, we're thorny, or we are producing good fruit. But the point is, the Father's not waiting for us to be good soil. He's not waiting for us to be perfect, to produce the most. It doesn't matter to him like that. He loves us just the same, so we get seed, and we could produce whatever we produce, recognizing that as he continues seeding, there'll be this flow of activity and flow of production that we as individuals will give out. So it really is so much more about the sower. It's more about God the Father than it is about us. We always look at this and we think it's about us and we never think about the sower. But the fact of the matter is the entire audience would be commenting and really tearing apart the sower for wasting the seed. Every single person in that audience is saying, well, what's he talking about? Who is the sower who's never sowed, obviously, ever in his life and would throw seed in that direction? What is that all about? You know? The second problem that we have here, or the second analysis that we have, Jesus' audience, mostly Jews at this point, right? They would see themselves as the good soil. They would see themselves as the promised people, the one that God has led out of Egypt into the promised land, has established through King David the throne in Jerusalem with the temple. They would see themselves as the ones blessed by and special and unique in God's eyes. So they would see themselves as a people, as being the good soil. Well, here we have God now coming and throwing seed into other areas that these Jewish people would not seem reasonable or being entitled to being sown at all. Gentiles, Samaritans, non-Jews. So for the Hebrew people, they're saying to themselves, well, why would he waste his seed over there? That's what they would say. Why is he wasting his seed on anything but the Jewish people? We're the select. And yet, if God is this sower, then we have to recognize that God, even today, is continuing to sow in areas outside of what we think is normal or acceptable or where God should be putting his time, energy, and, oh, by the way, the preciousness of his seed. And so these people would have two problems. One, they would be saying to themselves, you mean we don't have to be perfect and that God loves us anyway, and when we're rocky or thorny, God still sows into us, hoping to get whatever he can, and then also, wait. You mean this message, this person, this word become flesh, isn't just for us, it's for everybody, including all the people we've already made judgments are sinful, outside the law, outside of God's grace, not spiritually acceptable? You mean all those people, those stones, those thorns are also getting sown into? God is equally sowing into them as he is with us? Well, what's that all about? How does that happen? Two very important points that I think we carry with us this week as well. We have to recognize that you and I, at any given point in time, are one of those three fields. We're either stony, thorny, or we're good soil in a course of a day. Maybe even in a course of an hour, depending on how your day's going. And the fact of the matter is that God continues to sow into us, and as much as God continues to sow into us, he is also sowing into our neighbors. He is also sowing into the people that we've made judgments about, saying that they're not worthy, they're not this, they're not that. We call them this, we title them that, we put them into this box, we put them into that separation, right? You see it even now, right? And this is ironic to me that even within the Christian churches, everyone's arguing among themselves about who is more Christian than the other. It amazes me. It amazes me, but read some of the stuff that people are writing about now, and everyone's defending their position that we're true this or we're true that. You know where the truth comes down? How much are you producing? That's the truth of it. You know, you want to ask yourself whether or not you're a good Christian. How much are you producing? It's that simple. How much good are you producing in this world? Because obviously, that's how it's being judged by God. That's how Jesus is speaking about it. Jesus obviously wants the most that he could get out of our hearts and souls being cultivated in being rich soil. He wants us to be 60, 80, 100-fold. He does. But he's also not afraid to have us at a lower level producing whatever we can until we become that rich soil that probably takes time to till. And look, we all know this, right? We all know, any farmer knows that one field does not produce immediately the first time out of the gate. It takes years. It takes years of, fertilization and process and the switching and changing of crops, right? So that different nutrients, and then all of a sudden you end up really cranking out, right? It's the same thing with the human experience. We should expect the same of us. But recognize that this sower loves us even when we're rocky and thorny. But if you want to ask, and if we as a church want to ask, just how Christian are we, which another way of saying it is, how Christ-like are we, should really be the question. Not how Christian. Christian's a really nice title, but it doesn't mean anything. Christ-like actually implies action, activity, attitude, thought, mind, heart. How much are we producing? How much are we producing? And if we happen today to be in a thorny position, or if we happen today to be in a rocky position, can we make the most of that, even though that's where we are at this moment? But in the end, to God the Father, the sower, all of it, everyone is precious in his sight. God bless you.